Look at these 3 words written larger than the rest, with a special pride never written before or since. Tall words proudly saying, "We the people."
Welcome, everybody. This is Terry Rapoza and Win Carpenter. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well, but how about you?
I'm doing good. We have a special report here at MountainTop Media, and we're excited about it. We have a guest that we're very excited about, Alex Haberbush, and he is with the Lex Rex Institute, and he's going to tell us all about how we can hand count, how we can get back to liberty, and he's going to tell us all about what you can do in your community and what you can do in your county to bring back liberty. Alex, how are you, sir?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Terry. I'm glad to be here. Excited that Shasta has gone down the path that it has. I think this is going to be the first in a long line of counties to switch back to manual balloting and manual counting. I think it's a huge deal, and we're really excited to see where this goes.
Great. Well, thanks for being with us.
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah.
One of the things that everyone's been looking at is, how do the counties get engaged? I'm a citizen. How do I get engaged? What are some of the things that I can do in a nutshell on how I can get engaged? And then we'll get into a little bit more of the specifics. But really and truly, this is going to go out to many counties, probably all counties in California. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's really imperative that people have some kind of basis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, right now is the time to be doing it. You don't want to be left behind on this bandwagon. I think that is an important movement. And we've been getting a lot of calls from counties all across the state and actually all across the country interested in switching to manual counting. So, enough of them that we eventually put together a list of here are the steps that you go through if you want your county to switch to manual counts. And it I think it picks up wherever you are in the process. You can kind of skip straight to the one that's wherever you are in the process and just get your bearings of what to do, what steps come next, where to find resources for each of those steps, what to expect when you engage with county supervisors or various other people in the ways that we recommend. It can be very, very overwhelming, particularly for people who are starting from nothing, wanting to switch their county to manual counting. People feel like there's nothing they can do on their own. Well, that's not true. There's a lot that you can do, but you need to have your energy and efforts directed in the right way. Hopefully, this primer is a guide to do that. I actually spoke to a number of people from Shasta who I know were instrumental in getting the Board of Supervisors to adopt their resolution and asked for their advice because, I'm a lawyer. I've worked in grassroots politics a lot, but that's not my my area of practice. My area of practice is election law. So we're actually looking at you guys because you guys are the experts in getting this done. So I went to several people who I know were instrumental. I won't say their names here because I haven't asked their permission, but spoke with them and added in advice that they had, as well as some things that we've seen work in other counties on this matter and things that we've seen work on other matters that aren't necessarily election related, but that have pushed county boards to adopt initiatives. So it should be fairly comprehensive. That's probably a good place to look. You can find it on our website. That's lexrex.org, lexrex.org/articles/paper ballots.
All right.
And we'll have that available too. In fact, do you want to just show that on the screen to where we can kind of give just an overview on the screen of what it says in the table of contents, and maybe hit on a few points there that look that are something that will be really beneficial in getting folks engaged. You want to get that up there, Eli? Here we go.
There you go.
All right.
A basic primer to switching to paper balloting and manual counting in your county. Sounds good.
Now, we'll just scroll down this now. Alex, you can see that. You have it in front of you, too.
Yes, I do.
Okay. So maybe you just stop us. We'll scroll through this and sort of take us through this, and it's your party, buddy. Go right ahead and take us through this.
So,
go ahead.
It starts right from the beginning. I think point number one assumes that you don't even know why you might want manual counting or paper balloting in your county. So it gives you links to some resources and guides so you can educate yourself, understand why that system is preferable, why it might be better for your county. And That's important to know. What's also important to know is what you can actually do at the county level. And in California, we're very fortunate. Board of Supervisors has a great deal of authority in adopting their own voting systems. They do have to meet certain requirements from the Secretary of State. That's an important thing for you to know and understand. I think that can often be the biggest obstacle for people, is knowing, who's got power over what? What's the jurisdiction over this? Well, we point you to resources so you can figure out what the jurisdiction is in your particular state. We know what it is in California. That's where I practice. You guys already know what it is. Doesn't work that way in every single state, but what every state does have is some kind of code telling you how it works. And they're actually a lot easier to navigate than you think they are. After that, the majority of the steps are about how to create coalitions, embolden those coalitions, divide up responsibility, contact people who actually have sway in your county, whether it's the ROV or the board directly. I think it's going to depend on which one leans more favorable to your position. In Shasta, I guess it sort of originated with the board, who then talked with the ROV and is now working on implementing the system. But it shows you how to do that at each stage. You don't need a huge number of people to accomplish this. You just need people who are dedicated and who are willing to work together. One of the biggest points we want to stress is, like any political movement, I think there tends to be infighting in groups. That's what we want to avoid at all costs. It doesn't matter what somebody's politics are. It doesn't matter if they favor a slightly different manual count system than you do. We all got to work together on this if we want manual counting of ballots. We can figure out our other problems later. We may disagree and argue on those things later. But when it comes to this, I think working together is really going to be key. And being persistent is the other key. A lot of things aren't going to work the first time around. You're going to get rejected the first time around on anything. Don't stop, because really being persistent is what's going to win the day on this.
Yeah, it really is, and you talked about California. California probably, I would say, has the fastest changing laws in any state in the United States. I mean, we have new ones coming up every other week. I mean, I don't even know how many are in committee right now. I'd say if there were 100 in committee, I probably am low on the number.
Keep in mind, too, we did a recall here in Shasta County, and it was successful. And then now they're working on a law, or they have instilled a law. I think it's in the works for not being able to do the recalls locally.
No, what the new law that they want to pass is basically that there are 18 states in the United States to where you cannot recall a local official.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Okay, so California is one of those where you can.
You can, right.
And what they want to do is they want to have it be similar to those other states, to where if you recall an official, then it's going to be really up to a judge to make up their mind whether or not you can do it or not. And at this point, if in fact, let's say that no one can agree, the governor can step in. He has jurisdiction to step in, which isn't great for California. But I kind of want to stay with California to a degree, because I think there's so many variables, like we just discussed, between the laws and the policies and the regulations. Mm-hmm. In each state. There is such a difference between what California is doing and what the other states are doing. So I kind of want to stay with California as much as we can, because I really think if we break the back of tyranny here, we break the back of it everywhere. Anyway,
absolutely,
yeah. Go ahead.
Yep. Yeah, for good or ill, California leads the culture, and the rest of the nation. I mean, I hear people in other states whose states are going in a direction they don't like, and consistently they blame California. They say, you guys come up with a law. Mm-hmm. 5 years later, one of our legislators is pushing for it. So, for good or ill, whatever happens here does spread elsewhere. So if we can lead the movement on paper balloting, I think that would be fantastic. And you're probably going to see it explode across the nation.
There you go.
I know there's a restriction on the machines as far as the handicapped situation in the state of California. If you have someone who has a disability or a handicap, there has to be machines. Can you kind of explain that to the folks? I know you weighed in on it in one of your 10 points.
Yeah, so there's a lot of concurrent jurisdictions going on when it comes to elections. You have things at the federal level, things at the state level, and then at the state level, there's even multiple levels there, because there's what's actually in the law, the statutes, and then there's regulations proliferated by the Secretary of State, and you have requirements at the county level. So when it comes to handicapped voters, the big thing that everybody's going to talk about is HAVA. That's the Help America Vote Act. It's a federal law that was enacted in 2003. And what that law requires is that basically there be some kind of system to accommodate for handicapped voters. And this is actually, I have the language of 52 United States Code section 21081A3, which says that voting systems shall be accessible for individuals with disabilities, including non-visual accessibility for the blind and visually impaired, in a manner that provides the same opportunity for access and participation, including privacy and independence, as for other voters. Section B of that same statute says, satisfy the requirements of Section A through the use of at least one direct recording electronic system or other voting system equipped for individuals with disabilities at each polling place. Now, what HAVA does is it attaches federal funds only for states that adopt the requirements of HAVA.
Okay.
States like money. So I think virtually every state, if not every state, has adopted HAVA's requirements at this point. Well, that's what those requirements are. You know, you just read them along with me there. It's not too complicated. You have to have some kind of a system that can accommodate for people with disabilities or who are visually impaired. And there has to be at least one such booth with that kind of a system per polling place. Doesn't say anything about requiring electronic systems, but that's the way that most of these states have taken it. They've said that the easiest way for us to provide for disability access is to have an electronic system. They're probably right, because those are the ones that have already been approved by federal regulators, but it's not required there. And at any rate, even if you're going to go with electronic balloting for people with disabilities, as we just read, that's one booth per polling place. So that doesn't have to be your overall voting system, as long as people with disabilities have equal access and are able to vote in the same manner as everybody else. They can still use an electronic system while everybody else casts paper ballots. That's acceptable. I believe that's what Shasta has now voted to do, is to implement a general paper balloting system with electronic balloting, I think using HART, for people with disabilities, one of those per polling place.
Yeah, I think one of the things in Shasta County, I think we had like 57 polling places or something like that. We had a huge amount for a county our size. Is it possible a county could limit those polling places, and therefore you would limit the expenditure of the machines?
Potentially there are requirements on polling places as well. How many of those you have to have per resident, and a lot of it has to do with the ability of residents to be able to access a place to vote. There were a lot of complaints. I think in 2020, some of the states had polling places that were very far distant from where their voters lived, and they ended up facing lawsuits under the Voter Rights Act for that. So you don't want to go too far in terms of reducing the number of polling places. It's probably not, not that anybody's asked my advice on that point specifically, but probably not the way you want to go on that.
We just did.
Well, also too, Alex, if we have some polling places have two precincts or multiple precincts within the polling place. So how does that work? Is it done by precinct, or is it done by polling location, as far as how many machines need to be available? I guess that's kind of a confusing thing too, because I know in the past where my family would vote at a certain school facility, and then people that were in a different location, different area, would also vote in that same school district, school location, but they're totally set up as separate precincts and everything. So would each precinct in that polling location have to have a separate machine?
Well, I'm not entirely sure how you're describing your polling place as being organized. Were you able to vote in either of those two?
No, I could only vote in the one that was, because they have the sheets up on the door. You can find your name, or your polling location number according to your ballot, and so it would say your polling place is number 5, for instance. So I knew go to number 5, whereas number 4 is in there.
I see.
I couldn't vote at number 4.
Yeah, you'd need to have one of both. I think that for the purposes of HAVA, those would be considered two separate polling places.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. That's you could argue it. It might not be a fight that you want to make.
Right.
Because it's, lawsuits are probably more expensive than the polling machine anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
The other thing that I found interesting is that Kathy Darling Allen is basically said that we can't there can't be volunteers to count these ballots. They have to be county staff, and I believe that isn't correct.
That's a little bit of an ambiguity. So the California Elections Code does say that for someone to count votes, that person needs to be a precinct board member. And if you look at other sections of the code, other provisions in the code, when it refers to precinct board members, it says that the precinct board members are paid by the county. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can take that. And we addressed this issue in an open letter that we sent to the Board of Supervisors responding to that letter from Kathy Darling. But there's a couple of ways you could take that. One, you could say, oh, that means that each of the board members is required to be paid. Or I think the more naturalistic reading is to say, this statute is saying that if you pay them, the person responsible for writing the check is the county, not the state or anybody else. Mm-hmm. It also doesn't say anywhere that they have to be salaried employees of the county. So even if you did take it as a statute requiring compensation to people who are counting votes, it doesn't say they have to be full-time employees or salaried. It just says that you have to compensate them. Nothing in that precludes token compensation. So, there are the general perception and I think image that Kathy Darling's letter conveys, and I'm not saying she was intending to do this, but the general impression it gives is that there's sort of a rigid formula that has to be followed, and if you fall outside that formula, you're violating the law. But that isn't true. Most of these statutes are fairly narrow in what their focus is, and there's a great deal of room for creativity in how you're going to approach them while still being in full compliance. And it's now that the Board of Supervisors has voted, my hope is that Ms. Darling will find a little bit more creativity in our ability to comply with these things.
Okay, so then the employees are going to be a temporary employee for a day or two or however long the election season is for counting the ballots and dealing with the ballots. Same as the people that are hired to do on election day, they work that long day at the polling location and they're paid $100. So they're an employee as well. So if they're already doing that, why can they not do the same thing for other additional people that would work to do the counting?
That's exactly right.
What's the difference? Yeah. I mean, there is no difference. Is there? Am I wrong?
No, those are both board, those are both board members under the meaning of the statutory term there. There is no difference.
Mm. Kathy Darling Allen also said, and the reason we're bringing this up, folks, is because these are some things that happen to us, and gee whiz, they might happen somewhere else in California.
Well, keep in mind, too, just for the voters or the listeners that may not know, Kathy Darling Allen is a registrar of voters, the elections clerk here in Shasta County. She's the top dog for our county elections office. So just so people understand.
So they know who that is, of course.
Who that is.
Now,
in terms of running it, but you got to remember the Board of Supervisors calls the shots in terms of how the election will be administered. Yep. She's the one in charge of doing what they tell her to do.
That's correct.
And that's such a great point because it really hasn't seemed that way.
No. By her, that's for sure.
Yeah, it really, that's a great point. And I think, again, it almost goes back to jurisdiction. Who has that? Right. Who can interpose on behalf of the people? And can they nullify something that's unlawful?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, I think it really goes back to that. But
it's a problem we've seen nationwide and not just on election matters. Things tend to be shifted to, frankly, I guess to say it cynically, unaccountable bureaucrats. When the people who are empowered to actually control something tend to be the legislative bodies, in this instance, the Board of Supervisors, things tend to get handed to bureaucrats when they probably shouldn't. And that's where a concerned citizenry and a Board of Supervisors or other legislature that's zealous about the protection of their authority is extremely important.
I know one of the things that Kathy Darling Allen had said, as far as our ROV officer said, is that people who are going to be counting the votes need to be fingerprinted and they need to have background checks. Now, do you have to do that as a poll worker? And is that a legitimate
expense?
Is it a legitimate position?
Requirement?
Yeah, is it a requirement? I mean, if you don't have to do that as a poll worker, or an observer.
Well, do they have to do that for the people that count the ballots that when they have a contested race, or if the race is too close, when they have to hand count them? Do they require those people to be background checked and fingerprinted and et cetera? I mean, that was a question that I would have for her as well.
And the irony there is that nobody fingerprinted these machines. I mean, they're all working on software that
That's true.
is not open source. People don't have access to the code that's used to create this software. You know, I don't understand why there are
fingerprint right there.
Sorry, what's that?
And that's the fingerprint right there.
That's what I mean. That open source code would be the machine's fingerprint.
Yeah, right.
I don't understand why they would be trying to apply a stricter standard to human, people that you can actually talk to and examine, cross-examine, say, did you count these fairly, verify against another human being, as opposed to a machine that essentially has no accountability other than to the company that programmed it.
Well, and if you're a registered voter within the county, you should be able to work the polling locations. You should be able to do all that, right? I mean, unless you have some criminal activities that you've been accounted for.
Right.
And I don't know what those are. I'm not legal, so I'm not even going to go down that road. But I'm sure there are restrictions. But for the most part, if you're a registered voter within the county and you have been voting in say several of the past elections, you should be able to do that.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you won't get approved. I mean, I live in LA County, and I think I have lots of clients who tried to apply to be poll workers and were denied for various reasons. We're actually currently litigating a case because of a vaccine requirement that LA County imposed on all of its poll workers, COVID-19 vaccination, which obviously is a hotly contested political issue. Wow. By saying all of our poll workers got to be on one side of this, we think that amounts to, terrible discrimination, but that's currently being actively litigated.
Well, I know that our ROV officer, Kathy Darling Allen, basically had tried to stop two people, one a poll watcher, one as an observer, tried to stop them because of their behavior at a Board of Supervisors meeting. Well, if that behavior resulted in a 403 in the penal code to where they had to where they say, oh, okay, we disrupted this whole thing. We had to shut down the meeting.
Right.
You guys did this. Well, she may have a leg to stand on, but there was never any of that.
No.
Yeah. And even then, a mere accusation wouldn't be sufficient either, because it's very easy for a Board of Supervisors to try to kick people out that they don't like by accusing them on flimsy charges of disrupting something. But if that wasn't even brought by anyone, there's no, I mean, at that point, you're discriminating based on somebody's political views and differences.
That's exactly it. Yep. That's exactly it.
Yeah, she backed down.
Yeah, because they were just passionate about what they were talking about.
I think she was right to do that, because that's a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Yeah, she knew it. So I think that, and I think that's the thing too. A lot of to be bold in this, folks. We've got to be bold in it. And when you have someone like the Lex Institute and people like Alex that are willing to help like this. I mean, he's donating his time right now out of his workday
because thank you for that.
And thank you, brother.
Of course. I'm happy to do this kind of work. We're a nonprofit organization. We exist to keep government officials accountable and ensure that our Constitution is upheld. And we need money to be able to pay the bills, but if we could do it for free, believe me, we would, because this has got to happen.
Amen.
Well, there is a saying that the only thing a politician understands or an official understands is pain, and I mean that metaphorically for the NSA that's listening to us.
Yep.
And that is that the pain of losing power, the pain of losing their position, I think what you guys are doing is just amazing in the way that everything you're talking about here is crossing party lines. I mean, when we have folks like you that are able to come forward and say, okay, this is what's going on. Here's the law. This is what's going on. Here's what you can do. Mm-hmm. Here's where you can stand up.
Right.
Now, it's extremely important to us to be nonpartisan. It's upholding the rule of law and keeping public officials accountable to their sworn duty should not be something that has anything to do with your political beliefs. The fact that it's sometimes perceived that way, I think, is a sad comment on the state of how well things are currently going in terms of upholding our Constitution. But no, we are dedicated to being nonpartisan on this stuff.
Yeah, well, you look at Clint Curtis. I mean, he's a Democrat, a Biden supporter, and Do I think he's a patriot? Yeah, because I
Absolutely.
like what he's standing
Right.
up for.
Yeah.
And so, when you look at all this stuff, I think what you hit the nail on the head there, Alex. There's so much divisiveness frankly, in a lot of cases, the government, at least this is my opinion, trying to divide us.
Yeah.
And what you're doing here is something that's trying to bring forward the truth. Now, one thing that I'm curious about is there seems to be a lot of stuff that comes out about human error on these things. All we hear about is human error. I mean, it's like the machine's infallible in human beings who created the machines, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can't, and so I'd like you to expound on that.
Yeah, you ought to tell that to the state legislature then, because for recounts, for the 1% verification audit of the election, for every instance in which we absolutely need integrity of the count, they don't use machines. The code requires a manual count. When you're doing your audit to make sure that machines are accurate, they require a manual count. When you're doing a recount, they require a manual count. Throughout the elections code, manual counts are treated as the gold standard. So if they're not accurate, I think somebody ought to tell that to the state legislature, because that's what they've required as sort of your gold standard to verify what these machines are doing. But I think even more than the accuracy, because I think that, most people could probably agree that if you got a perfectly calibrated machine with perfect programming such that it's able to exclude all the stray marks and only count the right stuff, it's probably more accurate than a single person counting votes. The difference is that a person counting votes is somebody who can actually hold accountable when they do it wrong. If you have a paper trail for the votes that are cast, and if two different people can look at the exact same stack of ballots that have been cast, you can make sure that they're coming to the same conclusion on that. You can have somebody else that's verifying the count, making sure that things happened exactly the way they're supposed to. Whereas when you slide your ballot into a machine and the machine counts that vote, there's very little difference there between, running our elections as if they're like priestly confession, where you walk in, tell somebody what your vote is, and hope that they're going to go and accurately convey it to the person that counts it at the end of the day. You don't really know what's happening in the middle. Even if it's perfectly accurate, you can't check that. You can't verify that. That's not true with people. And I think that's why people are sort of the gold standard here.
That's a great point.
Well, now, if it's the gold standard to go through and do all the confirmation checks and the validations of whatever they're doing as far as confirming everything, why would we not make our entire election that gold standard? That gold standard should be for the entire thing. Why would we not do that?
That's a great question.
You don't have an answer?
I mean, I can give the cynical answer. Obviously, people who make these voting systems, electronic voting systems, there's a lot of money involved here. They're very expensive systems, as you guys have seen. And people that make them probably want to sell them. They want to grow their business, or at least be able to sustain their business. I think we ought to get corporations out of the voting of our elections.
Are they owned by former bureaucrats and former politicians, those companies?
I assume so. There was a report that came out a couple of...
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead and finish.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, some of the reports that have come out about the ownership of these companies, where they're owned by holding companies that are not even based in the United States, and because they're not in the United States, don't have the same reporting requirements for who owns shares in their stocks. So, who the heck knows who owns these companies?
Yeah.
Yep. If you can't trail it back to the validation of who actually owns it, we should not be using it. Point blank.
Yeah.
We should not be using it. Point blank.
That seems totally uncontroversial to me. It's shocking to me anybody would disagree with that.
Well, and I think the gold standard of having the sovereign citizens of each respective county doing the count that they are a registered voter in is the only way to go. That's the way it should be. It makes sense to me. It's logical. And we can use, within all the counties, these up and coming new voters who are, the 18-year-olds or 17, 18-year-olds that are in high school still, that are going to be future voters. They should see how the process works. And maybe they can get a civics credit from high school or something they can get credit for participating in the election. And that should be part of what we do. We grow with them and help them to grow into it so that we have the future workers of all the elections and helping us to get this process done and dealt with. That to me is a no-brainer. That should happen.
The idea that you just hand your election off to somebody who then reports a result back to you without any involvement from the voter or from the people who are going to be affected by the outcome of this election, I think is very, very dangerous. And it's part and parcel of a general tendency we've been seeing of things to get consolidated centrally and taken out of the hands of the people who used to be responsible for administering that. I mean, you were talking about that just a little bit earlier with respect to recall elections. Some people in the state don't like that we, the people, have the ability to recall local officials when we feel that they're not doing their job. So they want that responsibility to go to the hands of people centrally. I think that's a very dangerous impulse. We've got to keep things in the hands of the people who are ultimately supposed to be sovereign anyway. That's our name. So my organization's name, the Lex Rex Institute. Obviously that's a Latin phrase, Lex Rex, but what does it mean? It means the law is king. Because our leaders are not in charge of us. Our leaders are not our king. They are subject to the law.
That's correct.
And they have to follow those laws to the extent they have any legitimacy at all. To the extent those leaders have any legitimacy at all is the extent to which they follow those laws. And we, the people, are charged with holding them accountable to that. So we sort of exist to help people do that job of holding those officials to their sworn duty to uphold the law.
And the elected officials are subordinate to the electorate. That is exactly what needs to happen. And it's an upside down pyramid right now. So we need to make that work.
They're trustees. We've given them a trust.
That's right. That's right.
And it's ultimately ours. We've given it to them to hold on to it for a little while, to exercise it on our behalf. Mm-hmm. And if they don't do that in the way that we want them to, then we ought to fire those trustees.
Oh, that's a recall.
And that's the thing. I mean, the only role of government, the only role of it is to protect the rights of the sovereign. That's the only role of government.
That's right.
And again, and such a great point, Alex, because the Constitution is just a piece of paper unless we use it.
That's right.
That's exactly right.
And I think that, and that's the thing. We can use the Constitution of California. Article 3, Section 1 of the California Constitution states that the United States Constitution that was ratified by the states, because the states have the power, the United States Constitution, and whenever it's in its jurisdiction, is the supreme law of the land, and California is an inseparable part of that.
Correct.
Yes.
Now, anybody can hold on to that because some things that are law are not lawful. And some things that are lawful and that we perceive as lawful really isn't law.
Right.
Because it violates either the Constitution of the United States or the Constitution of California.
Or both.
That's exactly right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that really does, the oath of office in the California Constitution in Article 20, when you take that oath, the first oath you take is to the United States Constitution, then the California Constitution. So when you take those oaths, that means something.
Yes, it does.
And, we do have ways and means, that we can keep the feet to the fire. The challenge I think we run into here in California is that it's sort of like a very narrow playing field. I know that when we talk to some people down there, and we talked to the Senate Pro Tem's secretary, she said, the only problem with California is the fact that they pass these laws, they do these things because they all like it the way it is.
Right.
Who doesn't go in and come out richer?
That's right. Exactly.
Right. Well, and that's... They've made it as hard as they possibly can to hold themselves accountable to. I mean, it's much easier to sue a private entity than it is to sue the government. There's all kinds of hurdles you have to go through every time you do it. Our practice is definitely familiar with all of that, but I think it's the tendency of anybody in power. Their goal ultimately turns into keeping their own power unless we are very vigilant in making sure that their goal is doing what we want them to.
That's right.
And it's the specificity of when you have a corrupt official and they do something to you, even on a personal level, you still have Title 42, Code Section 1983. You still have that because you can sue them civilly down to their grandkids.
Yep.
And so I think that the shame is, and I want to get your take on this. We only have a few minutes, but I really want to get your take on this. The challenge we seem to have is that we continually have public officials breaking the law, and we continually have, and I don't want to get into to the weeds in that, but what I'm saying is that when they break the law, we go to court. we go to a lawsuit.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
but they broke the law, but we go to a lawsuit. So I'm trying to figure out.
The accountability factor there.
You think?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, not all laws are criminal to begin with. We don't necessarily attach criminal penalties to everything. Sometimes a lawsuit is the way that we enforce different rights, but the courts are always going to be slow, and the courts are always going to be expensive. That's why it's hugely important to me that organizations like ours don't operate for a profit, because we want to be able to bring cases on behalf of our clients for as cheaply as possible. And ideally, get that funding from somebody other than our client.
Sure.
Be able to court a donor who's able to fund that for them. But yeah, the courts can only do so much. If you want to really hold a public official accountable for what they've done, you have to remove them from office, because a court is never going to do that. A court's going to tell you that their action was invalid, and it's going to reverse it. That's very important. It's going to award damages so that you can be compensated for what happened to you. That's also very important. I think a little bit less than getting the law invalidated. But at the end of the day, what it can't do is get rid of the person.
Basically, what they do is
we have to do that through the electoral process. It's the only way.
You're right, and what they end up doing is censoring them. Or they censor themselves, which is kind of ironic. It's like, what? How does that work? We had that here happen here locally. It makes you wonder, like, why? Well,
Alex, we have about 5 minutes here, so bring us home on what your thoughts are and really where you want to bring this to.
Yeah, so I am hugely excited for what's happened in Shasta County. I want this to be a catalyst for the rest of the state and the rest of the nation to follow. I don't have anybody who is paying me to say that. That's not something that I'm saying because it's going to be good for some special interest. It's something that I'm saying because I care about the future of this nation. And if we don't have secure elections, and more importantly, if we don't have elections that people trust are secure.
Right.
Because that's more important even than the fact of security, is public trust in the security of our elections. But if we don't have that, we don't have a nation, because that's what guarantees representative self-government. So we got to get back to that. I think that paper balloting, manual counting are the only way to go for that. If you want to learn more about the work that we, the Lex Rex Institute, are doing, you can visit our website. That's lexrex.org. We are a constitutional advocacy organization, so we do a lot of teaching about the Constitution. Americans have not really been taught what their rights are or what the Constitution says in living memory at this point. So we try to pick up where the public education system failed and educate people on what our Constitution says, because you are not going to be able to defend your rights if you don't know what they are.
Absolutely.
So we figure we got to have the front end there, and then we back it up by having lawyers who are willing to bring these cases where they are appropriate.
Thank you, my friend. Have a great day.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.